Hey, don't touch that mat. You're just here to clean. The laughter came instantly, loud and effortless, like everyone already knew their place. To them, Naomi was nothing more than a black cleaner holding a mop, someone invisible who had stepped out of line. They mocked her without hesitation. They dismissed her presence without a second thought, and they treated her dignity like it was something they were allowed to take. What they didn't understand was this: the moment they chose to humiliate her in public, they made a mistake that couldn't be undone. Because very soon, that same room would fall completely silent, and the system protecting them would be exposed in a way no one was ready for. Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And subscribe for more powerful stories that demand to be heard. Naomi arrived at the building the same way she always did: early, quiet, unnoticed. She moved through the space with purpose, not because anyone respected her work, but because she respected herself. Every night, Naomi cleaned the floors, wiped the equipment, and erased the traces of people who never bothered to learn her name. To them, she was background noise. To Naomi Washington, this job was survival and discipline. The gym looked polished on the surface, but beneath it lived an unspoken hierarchy. Power sat comfortably at the top, protected by titles, routines, and silence. At the center of that power was Ryan Mitchell, confident, untouchable, the kind of man whose authority was never questioned because people had learned it was safer not to. Ryan Mitchell didn't raise his voice often. He didn't need to. His approval decided who belonged and who didn't. Naomi noticed everything: the way conversations stopped when she walked by, the way respect was handed out selectively, the way certain people were corrected gently while others were watched more closely, judged more harshly. One of them was Aiden. Aiden Brooks was younger than most of the students, smaller too, but he worked harder than anyone in the room. Naomi saw it every night. She saw how Aiden Brooks stayed late, repeating movements long after others had left. She saw how he checked the room before speaking, how confidence was something he borrowed, not owned. His mother, Monica Brooks, waited patiently on the sidelines, alert, protective, used to watching her child be measured unfairly. The environment wasn't openly violent. It didn't need to be. It ran on quiet exclusion, casual dismissal, and rules that shifted depending on who they were applied to. The kind of place where people said things like, "It's not personal," while making everything personal. Where dignity was conditional. Naomi Washington felt the tension building long before anyone else did. She felt it in the way Ryan Mitchell watched certain people longer than necessary. She felt it in the silence of bystanders who noticed but said nothing. And she felt it in the tightening air of a room that rewarded obedience over fairness. This wasn't going to end with cleaning supplies and lowered eyes. The system had already chosen its target. It just didn't realize who was standing right in front of it. The tension didn't explode all at once. It crept forward, quiet, deliberate, protected by routine. Naomi Washington noticed the shift before anyone else did. She always did. The room felt different when authority decided to flex. Ryan Mitchell's posture changed. His voice sharpened. His patience thinned. The confidence he carried every day turned heavier, more deliberate, like he knew no one in that space would challenge him. It started small. Naomi Washington was told to clean around the mat instead of waiting for the class to finish. It wasn't policy. It was control. Ryan Mitchell watched her closely, correcting her movements with irritation, as if the floor itself belonged to him. When she paused to avoid disrupting the students, his voice cut through the room. "Keep moving! Don't stop the class!" The message was clear. Her presence was tolerated only when it stayed invisible. The students noticed. The parents noticed. No one spoke. Aiden Brooks was next. Ryan Mitchell began calling him out more aggressively than the others. Longer stares, sharper corrections, tighter rules. When Aiden Brooks made a mistake, it was announced. When others slipped, it was ignored. Naomi Washington watched the boy's shoulders tighten with every command, watched confidence drain from his movements. Monica Brooks noticed too. She always did. Her eyes followed her son constantly, measuring the room the way black parents learned to do early, looking for danger disguised as discipline. Ryan Mitchell didn't hide it anymore. He spoke about standards. He spoke about fit. He spoke about how not everyone was built for the same expectations. Each word landed heavier than the last. Naomi Washington saw the pattern form clearly. This wasn't random behavior. This was a system operating exactly as designed, quietly pushing certain people to the margins while pretending it was neutral. Ryan Mitchell thrived in that system. His authority grew stronger, the more no one questioned him. The bystanders stayed silent. Parents exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. Students looked at the floor. Marcus Chen noticed everything and said nothing. That silence fed Ryan Mitchell's confidence. He moved through the room like a man untouchable, backed by tradition, routine, and the comfort of knowing people would rather look away than intervene. The confrontation arrived when Naomi Washington stood still. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. She simply stopped moving. Ryan Mitchell saw it instantly. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back either. The room felt it. The pause, the challenge, the shift in balance. For the first time, Ryan Mitchell was being denied automatic obedience. The response was immediate. "You don't get to decide how things work here," Ryan Mitchell said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're here to clean. That's it." Laughter followed. Not because it was funny, but because power had spoken, and people knew the safest reaction was to go along with it. Naomi Washington felt the humiliation land fully this time. Not private, not subtle. Public, intentional, designed to remind her and everyone watching of her place. Aiden Brooks watched it happen. The boy's hands tightened at his sides. He looked at Naomi Washington, then at Ryan Mitchell, then back at the floor. Monica Brooks saw the change instantly. Her jaw clenched. Her body leaned forward slightly, protective instincts flaring. This was no longer about discipline. This was about dominance. Ryan Mitchell pressed further. "If you're confused about your role," he said, "maybe this isn't the right place for you." The room froze. Marcus Chen felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He had seen versions of this before. Students quietly pushed out, parents subtly discouraged, complaints buried under professionalism. He had told himself it wasn't his fight, that it wasn't his place. But now, it was happening in front of everyone. David Park wasn't on the floor yet, but his presence loomed in the background. The rules, the reputation, the system that protected instructors like Ryan Mitchell by default. Naomi Washington knew how this usually ended. She had seen it her entire life. Silence rewarded. Resistance punished. Ryan Mitchell stepped closer. "Or," he added, his voice lowering, "if you think you understand this space so well, you can prove it." The implication hung heavy in the air. A challenge disguised as mockery. An invitation designed to humiliate further. Aiden Brooks looked up sharply. Monica Brooks held her breath. Marcus Chen felt the room tilt towards something dangerous. Naomi Washington didn't react the way Ryan Mitchell expected. She didn't retreat. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She lifted her head and met his gaze. That moment, quiet, steady, unflinching, shifted something fundamental in the room. The laughter stopped. The silence felt different now. Not passive, not fearful. Charged. Ryan Mitchell smiled, certain he still controlled the outcome. The system had always protected him. It always would. What he didn't realize was that the moment he turned public humiliation into a test of power, he crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Because the challenge he thought would reinforce his authority was about to expose everything holding it up. The room held its breath as the challenge stopped being theoretical and became real. Ryan Mitchell stepped fully onto the mat, his confidence sharpened by the attention. This was where he thrived. Center stage, authority unquestioned, control unquestionable. He looked around the room, feeding off the silence, mistaking it for support. To him, this wasn't a risk. It was a performance. Naomi Washington stepped forward without hesitation. That alone disrupted the balance. She didn't rush. She didn't posture. She moved with a calm that didn't belong to someone being publicly cornered. The laughter from earlier had vanished completely now, replaced by a tension so thick it felt physical. Naomi Washington stood across from him, not as a cleaner, not as a distraction, but as someone refusing to be reduced any further. Ryan Mitchell smirked. "You sure you want to do this?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Naomi didn't answer. That silence unsettled him more than words ever could. David Park appeared at the edge of the mat, his expression tight, alert. The situation had escalated beyond ego. This was no longer a joke, no longer manageable with reputation alone. David Park knew it, and so did Marcus Chen, who stood frozen near the wall, watching something he had tried not to see for far too long finally surface. Ryan Mitchell made the first move. He came in fast, aggressive, designed to overwhelm. It was supposed to end quickly. That was the point. But Naomi Washington didn't retreat. She shifted, subtle, controlled, precise. The movement was quiet, almost invisible, but it stopped him cold. His second attempt landed no better. The third didn't land at all. The room changed instantly. Ryan Mitchell's confidence cracked, just slightly. His breath quickened. His movements lost their rhythm. What he expected to dominate had slipped beyond his control, and for the first time, he looked unsure. Marcus Chen felt it then, the realization hitting him with full force. This wasn't luck. This wasn't improvisation. Naomi Washington wasn't reacting. She was calculating. Years of discipline surfaced in the way she moved, the way she anticipated, the way she refused to be rushed. Aiden Brooks watched without blinking. The boy's eyes tracked every motion, his small frame rigid with focus. Monica Brooks leaned forward unconsciously, one hand gripping the edge of her seat. She felt fear, yes, but also something else. Recognition. This wasn't chaos. This was exposure. Ryan Mitchell grew reckless. "You think this proves something?" he snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. Naomi finally spoke. "It already has." The words landed harder than any strike. Ryan Mitchell lunged again, sloppy now, angry, desperate to regain dominance. Naomi Washington moved once more, and this time the result was undeniable. He stumbled, not dramatically, not violently, just enough for everyone to see it. Authority faltering in real time. The silence was complete. David Park stepped forward instinctively, his face pale with understanding. This was no longer about policy or procedure. Whatever had been hidden inside this system, whatever had been allowed to grow unchecked, was collapsing in front of witnesses. Ryan Mitchell froze. His breathing was uneven. His eyes darted around the room, searching for reassurance that wasn't there anymore. Parents weren't nodding. Students weren't impressed. The silence he once controlled had turned against him. Marcus Chen broke it. "This isn't the first time," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was admitting. "It's happened before." The room shifted again. David Park turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Marcus Chen didn't look away. "There are records, complaints, patterns." Ryan Mitchell's face drained of color. Naomi Washington stood unmoving, the center of gravity unchanged. She didn't need to say anything more. The truth was no longer theoretical. It had form now. Witnesses, history, evidence. Aiden Brooks stood up. No one told him to. He simply did. The act was small, but it carried the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Monica Brooks rose with him, her expression unflinching, unafraid. Ryan Mitchell stepped back, finally understanding what he had lost. Not a match, not a moment. Control. David Park's voice cut through the silence, firm and final. "That's enough." The power in the room shifted completely, and for the first time, Ryan Mitchell wasn't standing on the side of authority. He was standing alone, exposed and afraid. The consequences came fast, and they were final. David Park didn't hesitate. Authority had shifted, and this time it wasn't performative. Ryan Mitchell was removed from the mat in front of everyone he once controlled. His position was suspended immediately, pending a formal investigation that would no longer be handled quietly. Records were pulled. Complaints were reviewed. Patterns that had been ignored were now undeniable. Ryan Mitchell didn't argue. He couldn't. The system that had protected him had turned its back the moment witnesses refused to stay silent. Marcus Chen stood beside David Park as documentation surfaced. Dates, names, incidents that painted a clear picture of selective enforcement and racial bias. What had once been dismissed as misunderstandings was now exposed as design. David Park made the announcement himself. Ryan Mitchell would not be returning. Policies would change. Oversight would follow. The room listened, not with relief, but with the weight of understanding what had been allowed to happen for far too long. Naomi Washington remained still as the fallout unfolded. There was no celebration in her expression, no victory lap. What she carried instead was validation, something deeper and harder earned. For the first time, the space acknowledged her, not as labor, not as background, but as truth. Naomi Washington had forced visibility where silence once thrived. Aiden Brooks stood closer to her now, not hiding, not shrinking. Monica Brooks met Naomi's eyes with gratitude that didn't need words. Their presence was no longer conditional. Their dignity was no longer negotiable. David Park approached Naomi Washington directly. The offer he made wasn't symbolic. It was structural, real authority, real influence, real change. Naomi Washington didn't answer immediately. She understood something. The room was still learning. Systems don't fix themselves because they're exposed once. They change when pressure stays. What happened that night didn't just remove a man from power. It dismantled a pattern. Ryan Mitchell lost his position, his credibility, and the silence that once shielded him. Naomi Washington gained something more important than approval control over her future, and proof that standing firm forces reckoning. This wasn't a story about strength revealing itself in a single moment. It was about what happens when injustice meets resistance, and witnesses choose courage over comfort. Because racism doesn't survive confrontation, it survives silence. And the question this story leaves behind is simple, but uncomfortable. How many systems are still standing, only because no one has forced them into the light? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about truth, justice, and accountability.